Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode in the celebrity series of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and within this series, I aim to look at individuals in Hollywood, the music industry, and those of notable fame who may be exploiting their positions to coerce others into things that they typically wouldn't do. I started this series with Jared Leto, and I will be following that episode up with a look at Ezra Miller. But first, I wanted to answer a few questions for myself. How did the industry get to this point of protecting predators? How was Hollywood shaped in a way that would allow these things to be covered up? And how have things changed since the golden age of Hollywood with things like the Me Too and Time's Up movements? I'll take a quick look at all of these things in today's episode, The Cult of Hollywood. There have been no shortage of groups that have emerged out of California. A few to include would be the Manson family, the People's Temple who moved from Indiana to California to create the first attempts at a temple commune, the Source family with James Edward Baker, the Children of God with David Berg collecting followers from the area, the Self-Realization Fellowship, the Church of Scientology, Synanon in Santa Monica, and even things like the Process Church of the Final Judgment, the Esalen Institute, the Black House, where Anton LaVey led the Church of Satan. And there have been no shortage of celebrities that have been linked to some of the before-mentioned groups and others as well. Joaquin and River Phoenix grew up in the Children of God, along with actress Rose McGowan, who has come forward herself to call Hollywood a cult. Michelle Pfeiffer was involved in breatharianism, Alison Mack in NXIVM, and of course Tom Cruise is wrapped up in Scientology, along with many other notable celebrities, including John Travolta, Elizabeth Moss from The Handmaid's Tale, and Giovanni Ribisi from Sneaky Pete. And since following Scientologist Danny Masterson's trial, where the actor has been charged on 3 counts of forcible rape when victims came forward calling out historical abuse perpetrated by Masterson and covered up by fixers within the Church of Scientology, it felt like an all too familiar story, one that I couldn't shake, and one that I felt like I'd heard before from many, many, many years ago. And that was the story of Patricia Douglas, an up-and-coming starlet in the so-called golden age of Hollywood. In 1937, Douglas was invited to a Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer party, the film production company known by many as MGM. During this age of film, it was common for stars to attend parties and rub shoulders with others in entertainment. In fact, it was expected of them, and sometimes they were even contractually obliged. However, at this particular party, Douglas was raped by MGM salesman David Ross. Douglas was one of the very first people to come forward about sexual abuse in the industry, which caused her to lose her career. A smear campaign against Douglas ensued and seemingly left her losing the most, not MGM and not David Ross. This sort of behavior in Hollywood by those in positions of power was not unheard of or even uncommon. But due to things like morality clauses inside these legally binding contracts, celebrities could not speak out about things that they had endured, whether they were illegal or not. So let's go back and explore how these clauses came into action and how the golden age was born. Evolving from magic lantern shows, the silent era of film existed predominantly in 1894 to 1929, and the demand for movies was insatiable. Performers could base their entire careers on looking great in certain roles, because voice acting and texture was not something the industry had to worry about back then. But after Thomas Edison created the first kinetograph, a motion picture camera widely used within the film industry in 1888 to change the world of filmmaking, it wouldn't be long before sound started to play a part. Edison patented everything, took multiple parties to court, winning many lawsuits and losing just as many. Eventually, independence would win out, and the Edison empire fell apart, paving a way for the new age of film. which would be known as the Golden Age. This wouldn't spell the end of individuals attempting to control the entirety of the film industry, however. Chicago was once America's great hub of film, but that all began to change in the late 1800s. In fact, just 2 years before Edison's grand invention made its way into the studios in 1886, Harvey Henry Wilcox moved to Los Angeles with his wife. A man with a complicated history of sickness that at 13 left him in a wheelchair, of leaving a life of shoemaking behind to move into real estate, a man with strict fundamentalist religious ideals. He would take buggy rides with his prized horses across canyons alongside his wife, Ida. Falling in love with the scenic views, believing they could build a true religious community there, Wilcox used his real estate empire money to purchase acres upon acres of land for $150 an acre, selling them to people for up to $1,000 in the 1880s. Eventually, his wife Ida named the entire area that he had purchased Hollywood, and so the location known so well around the world today suddenly burst into existence. Wilcox would die in his late 90s, a few years after purchasing the land, and despite long battles against those attempting to buy up the land and make movies in the area, Wilcox would lose. And by the 1910s, this became America's new hotspot for filmmaking and fame. Certainly not the utopic prohibitionist landmass that Wilcox fought for it to be. Los Angeles canyons were a great place for films to be made, notably westerns, which were a huge hit at the time. One notable area within these canyons was Spahn's Ranch, which was owned by George Spahn, where western sets were put up, and individuals working in the film industry would live within these stables and on the sets for reduced prices and in exchange for the upkeep and work in the industry. Spahn's Ranch is where the Manson family would reside for the majority of their criminal activity, alongside spats spent within Death Valley. Immigrants and individuals from all over the world would flock to Hollywood looking for work in the growing film industry. Living on location in places like Spahn's Ranch meant that a lot of people could be easily abused and taken advantage of, and that was not restricted to the workers in the backgrounds of the films, being pumped out by the 5 major production companies at the time. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, Paramount Pictures, Fox, Warner Brothers, and RKO dominated the industry as the big players, alongside 3 smaller companies, Universal Pictures, United Artists, and Columbia Pictures. These 8 companies had worked out a system which would allow them to dominate the film industry, with no possible way for other production companies to have a chance to cut out their own slice in the filmmaking world. This was true for even the leading actors and actresses to pick and choose their own films. This started primarily with an actress called Florence Lawrence. Lawrence was born in the same year that Wilcox purchased the land within Hollywood and began selling it off. Lawrence would appear in films made by the Edison Manufacturing Company before moving on to work with other competing giants before the golden age of sound. Lawrence became such a huge star that she was able to demand double her salary for certain roles, which was unheard of for women in the industry at that time, and she would appear in up to 300 films in a single year. At one point, the independent motion picture company known as IMP hosted a huge publicity stunt where they announced the tragic death of Lawrence ahead of the premiere of a new upcoming film. They positioned this as Lawrence's final on-screen appearance, and nobody should miss it, which created such a fervor for fans to see the movie. And then the studio announced that Lawrence wasn't dead. She was in fact alive and well, and she would be attending the grand premiere of the movie on March 25th, 1910. And if you really wanted to see if she would appear, you should pay tickets and attend. And sure enough, Lawrence re-emerged on this day to attend her own premiere. Tragically, Lawrence's career would only spiral downwards after this when she no longer served the same purpose for the industry. With new stars taking her place, she died by supposed completion of suicide and was found dead in her apartment from eating ant poison on December the 27th, 1938, with a funeral being held on December 30th and a burial in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Hollywood, California. Although Lawrence had a regretful and all too familiar downfall from the heights of fame through the fault of those even higher, what the production companies were able to do with her name alone to sell tickets and create such a craze around one person rather than the films themselves made production companies take note. And soon from this, the star system was born. The star system is really what allowed Hollywood to become what it is today. Budding performers looking for their chance in the spotlight would be groomed and abused by managing members of the Big Five and Small Three production companies. If you couldn't get in with the Big Five, you would try with the Small Three, even if it would tarnish your reputation. The Big Five were elite, and they created an airtight system that would ensure complete control over their budding stars. Just a few things to list. People had their names changed, were forced to take uppers in the day to get through long days of filming with lots of energy, followed by downers at night so they could sleep. Fixers were hired to do damage control, making sure only a certain image of stars was portrayed to the public. Stars had to act a certain way in public according to legally binding contracts. This meant often not seeing family or friends, entering relationships with co-stars so that newspapers could report the every move and action of fan favorites on-screen lovers, supposedly marrying off-screen and creating the perfect romantic partnership. Stars were forced to have abortions, their diets restricted with pills, caffeine, and up to 80 cigarettes a day. Often when signing up to a studio, stars had to cut their hair, have it coloured, and change their appearance entirely. Studios had worked out a formula that would make a star take over the big screen, and it depended little on the acting ability of the stars, who were often typecast into their roles, and depended more on the studio's ability to create a star using a cookie-cutter template. Stars who committed crimes, assaults, or the like had it covered up by fixers who were employed by the studios to enforce these diets, drugs, and relationships. The fixers would also cover up anything that would result in bad press for the star and, in turn, the studios. The stars were owned by the production companies, who would cast them in any role for any film and on a small weekly salary. If stars tried to do anything outside of these binding contracts, they would be breaking what was known as a morality clause, and as punishment, the stars would often be rented out to other studios, usually one of the Small Three, which would tarnish a reputation and social standing, until the studio that owned the star would decide to build them back up again. And this all sounds pretty wild, but I can assure you that it definitely happened, and in some ways, it still does. Here are some examples of the darker side of Hollywood's golden age. Margarita Carmen Cancino, of Spanish origin, was treated horrifically by her own father when she was growing up. She was forced to perform alongside him in casino shows around America, where her father would then spend any money that they had made on gambling and alcohol, telling her that they had no money for food, forcing her to beg on the streets for money. Eventually, Cancino would be sold to Fox Studios, where she was originally cast as an exotic foreigner for a few B movies. When Fox didn't renew her contract, she tried her luck with Columbia, according to RealRundown.com. And it was with Columbia that Cancino was subjected to the racial discrimination of Hollywood at the time, which is widely documented. She was what they called whitewashed, with her name and appearance changed, and Margarita Carmen Cancino became Rita Hayworth. She was forced to lose weight, had her hair dyed red, and even underwent electrolysis to raise her hairline because her original hairline was considered ethnic. This would be just one of the many that were abused at the hands of Hollywood. Norma Jean Mortensen, who went on to become Norma Jean Baker, was subjected to sexual abuse as a child, at the age of only 8 years old. When she was picked up by Hollywood, her image was changed, with long brown curls being dyed bleach blonde, and her name being changed from Norma Jean to Marilyn Monroe. Through a string of marriages and exploitation in the industry, and the sexual abuse that she was exposed to from many different men, Monroe would die from a barbiturate overdose at the age of 59. Other stars endured name changes too. A few to note would be Marion Morrison or John Wayne, Frances Ethel Gum or Judy Garland, Archibald Leach, Cary Grant, and Lucille Fay LeSueur, Joan Crawford. Ruth Davis, better known as Betty Davis, who was suspended by Warner Brothers for turning down certain roles, was one of the first people to take a stand against the star system. Once she was suspended, this meant that her contract was still binding. She couldn't go and look for work with other studios. John Gilbert was hired by MGM, but when co-founder Louis B. Mayer wanted to end the contract early, Mayer planted rumors about the star and intentionally put him in bad movies, which caused Gilbert's career to tank, according to Harper'sBazaar.com. Lucille Fay LeSueur was told that she would have to undergo a name change after MGM founders thought that her name sounded too close to sewer. She was soon reborn as Joan Crawford, which she hated herself because she likened the word Crawford to crawfish. When stars wanted to bring their own flavor to films, they were told to follow instructions. Instead, the studios would hire their own coaches to give acting, singing, and dancing classes to the stars, and if they complained of being put into typecasting roles and of wanting to branch out into other types of acting, they would be punished by being rented out to other, lesser studios. A lot of the stars had fake backstories created about them in order to sell a certain image to newspapers and journalists, who would compel more people to want to see the films that the stars were appearing in. And the stars were made to uphold those stories when appearing in public. Contracts indicated that stars had to always be in full makeup and dress when out in the world, with no pants allowed. Famously, Katharine Hepburn rejected her studio's dress code by wearing pants, staging a bold defiance against RKO, who removed all the pants from her wardrobe. As actors were told to uphold a so-called gentlemanly image at all times, all allegations of adultery, womanizing, and messy divorces were handled by Hollywood's fixers, who would often arrange cash buy-offs for those involved in order to maintain the carefully cultivated image that the studios had made for each of their stars. Jean Harlow was told that marrying would alter her on-screen sex appeal, and so using the morality clause, she was told that she was forbidden to marry William Powell. And this would hold true when stars wanted to have children and start families. Women like Ava Gardner were forced to have abortions. Some celebrities would lie about their pregnancies, give birth, and then secretly adopt those babies so that they could keep their own children. Stars were forced to marry one another off-screen and act like real in-love couples, and this included Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, with studios going to great lengths to cover up Rooney's adulterous behavior and Playboy antics. And it was Judy Garland's story that was perhaps one of the saddest to learn about for this particular episode. According to some sources, Garland's mother fell pregnant with Garland and attempted a back-alley abortion. Garland was born despite her parents' attempts to end the pregnancy, and eventually she would join her two sisters in performing in a trio to generate money for her family. Garland was essentially groomed for stardom by her mother from the minute that she could walk and talk, and would eventually be entered into a studio contract as a child. landing the role of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz at the age of 17. Being a little older than her character, Garland was forced to wear restrictive clothing to minimize her female features and given a bodyguard who would follow her around at all times to manage her diet, ensuring she stayed as thin as possible. Being signed to MGM, Garland was the lowest paid cast member of the movie, according to Looper.com, and in order to keep Garland's weight down, she was fed amphetamines and put on a diet of chicken soup, black coffee, and a steady supply of cigarettes by MGM co-founder Louis Mayer. This guy. There were reports of Garland being sexually assaulted by male cast members who would reach up her dress and make life on set a living hell. Garland was forced to attend social parties where she would drink alcohol, be given uppers to keep up her energy, and downers to go to sleep at night. Eventually, Garland's life would descend into an existence of addiction, and eventually she would be fired for not showing up on set or for being absent for weeks at a time. Garland went through a string of marriages and difficult partnerships, giving birth to a son named Joey Loft and two daughters, Liza Minnelli and Lorna Loft, who have both had their own share of the spotlight, despite what the industry did to their own mother. Judy Garland died of a supposed accidental overdose on June the 22nd, 1969, at the age of only 47 years old. It wasn't only actors' lives that these production companies had sole authority over. They also controlled the theatres and would often use a system called block booking to ensure that theatres were on contract to play only their films, selling the theatres a block of films at a time. This meant that no other independent studios had any chance of getting in. Back in the Golden Age, there were even Universal Theatres and Paramount Pictures theatres. The Big Five and Small Three had complete authority over the entire industry and its stars, with a carefully created system that would ensure no other studios could even get a look in. Picture houses played a huge part in uniting the weary folks enduring the Second World War, but in 1948 there was a momentous court ruling in the United States versus Paramount Pictures Inc. trial, and the Paramount decree came into place, forcing the age of authority to come to an end, allowing, by law, independent filmmakers to gain some traction for block booking to be taken out of the studio system. Alongside this, stars would begin to defy contracts and studios, change their outfits, have families, speak out against abuse, and so the age of the star system would also begin to crumble alongside the studio system. But the systems created within those two things, the systems of abuse, of aiding and abetting predators, of allowing exploiters and rapists and certain individuals who were cultivating an underbelly of cult-like and coercive behavior. It allowed these things to bloom into existence and thrive and remain there long after the star system and studio systems had supposedly disappeared. And I could argue that you can see some of those things today. There are some horrific stories out there about the true side of Hollywood in this so-called golden age. And we see similar things in other stories that are more recent. In Baz Luhrmann's compelling biopic of Elvis Presley, we see how the star was financially abused by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, to feed Parker's own gambling habits. Presley was supplied with prescription drugs for a number of years and died at the young age of 42 on August the 16th, 1977. He was dubbed the King of Rock and Roll, but when he died, he had less than $1 million in his bank account, which didn't really align for a star as big as Elvis Presley. Recently, there have been similar allegations brought forward by singer Kesha. According to thethings.com, she signed her deal with Dr. Luke back in September 2005, shortly after gaining recognition for her appearance on Hilton's The Simple Life reality show. Dr. Luke came across her demos and supposedly convinced her to ditch Nashville and move out to Los Angeles instead. And since music had been something that Kesha wanted to pursue in her teen years, she certainly didn't hesitate at the opportunity. At the time, Luke was best known for producing the worldwide hit Since You've Been Gone for Kelly Clarkson, which had turned the American Idol winner into a global household name. Kesha had high hopes with her music, and that with the help of Luke, could replicate the success from the aforementioned artist. And while it did end up happening for the blonde-haired beauty, she certainly had to sacrifice a lot. On October 2005, a month after signing her deal, the Hilton celebrated Nicki's birthday, and Kesha had been invited for the occasion. It just so happened that Luke was also going to be present. Court documents reveal that Luke allegedly passed Kesha a date rape drug called GHB, which he, according to the singer, described as sober pills, before taking her back to his hotel room and committing an unlawful act while she was unconscious. Kesha's mother came forward and shared that her daughter had gotten in contact with her the following morning after waking up naked in a hotel room. She recalled blacking out at some point, but knew she was ushered back to the place by her producer. Quote, "Mum, I don't know where I am. I think we had sex. I'm sore and sick. I don't know where my clothes are. I think I need to go to the hospital." Kesha later told her mother, "Mum, I just want to sing. I don't want to be a rape case victim. I just want to get my music out. I didn't follow my instincts." When 2006 came along and Kesha's music was nowhere to be heard on the radio, she teamed up with Luke to have her contract merged with RCA Records, a Sony Music Entertainment subsidiary, for the distribution of any upcoming albums she planned to release. During this time, Luke had allegedly instructed Kesha to terminate her working relationship with her management firm, DAS Communications. Quote, "Dr. Luke has just called me, and I have 24 hours to fire my lawyer and my managers and go back with him. Anytime I get a contract, he's going to come forward and basically says he owns me. What do I do?" she shared in court documents. By 2014, Kesha filed a lawsuit against Luke, claiming he had not only sexually assaulted her, but also violently thrashed his arms at her, which had led her to run down the Pacific Coast Highway in a desperate attempt to escape. The lawsuit went on to mention that Kesha has struggled with emotional and psychological abuse involving fat shaming. In 2018, she lost her appeal to break her ongoing working relationship with Luke Kimasabi, since she signed a 6-album deal with him back in 2005, but this lawsuit is still ongoing. In 2008, amidst a decline in mental health, Britney Spears had a conservatorship set up, where her personal life and finances were controlled under the legal guardianship of her own father. The BBC reported, "The conservatorship has power over her finances and career decisions, plus major personal matters such as her visits with her teenage sons and whether she can get remarried." She told the court in June, quote, "I want to be able to get married and have a baby. I was told right now in the conservatorship, I am not able to get married and have a baby." The conservators wouldn't let her have her birth control removed, she claimed. She also said she was forced to go on tour, made to take medication she didn't want to, and to go into rehab. Court records obtained by the New York Times showed that it's even extended to dictating the colors of her kitchen cabinets. A documentary made by the newspaper also alleged that the singer's phone and bedroom had been bugged by security staff working for Britney Spears' father, Jamie Spears, who was legally her conservator. In 2021, Britney Spears won an appeal to have her father suspended as her financial conservator and was allowed to choose her own one with help from her own lawyer. We have heard the decades-long abuses perpetrated by Harvey Weinstein, who is on trial right now for being just like the heads of those studios back in the day, using his position to abuse women of Hollywood. We are hearing more about the likes of R. Kelly, whose cult following and giant fan base is not enough anymore to allow them to continue their reign of terror. The Me Too and Time's Up movements have allowed for a big shift in whistleblowing, of the abuse coming forward about the likes of Kevin Spacey, who is now facing additional charges of assault, but there is still a long way to go. Now that we understand a lot of the cult of Hollywood, how it came to be, and how it still exists today, perhaps we can better understand these predators that lurk in these systems of protection. carefully created by the entertainment industry itself. That is the end of this episode, and I hope that you have found the content interesting or insightful. If you have any suggestions of celebrities that we should be looking at or covering for this series, then please get in touch and let me know. You can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.